The 50% cost cut. Microsoft just slashed the compute cost of its enterprise security AI in half by deploying a model with just 5 billion active parameters. Yesterday, the company released MAI Cyber 1 Flash, a purpose-built cybersecurity model that completely abandons general knowledge in favor of hyper-specialized vulnerability detection. Instead of paying the massive compute tax required to run a frontier model for every enterprise query, Microsoft is using a cheap, targeted asset to handle the bulk of the work. It is a direct admission that the economics of generalized AI are broken for single-purpose workflows. And the architecture Microsoft built to run this model reveals a brutal reality for the frontier labs selling generic intelligence. The routing architecture. The new model does not operate on its own. MAI Cyber 1 Flash runs inside a multi-agent harness Microsoft calls MDASH, which sits at the center of their new perception platform. This is a routing play. Microsoft pushes 90% of the volume to their own cheap, specialized model. Only when the system encounters the hardest 10% of tasks does it route the query to a massive, expensive model like GPT 5.4. By treating the frontier model as an escalation path rather than the default engine, Microsoft scored nearly 96% on the CyberGym benchmark while crushing their own operating expenses. But if you look closely at the product packaging, the actual strategy has very little to do with the model itself. The harness lock-in. Here is the catch. Microsoft is not selling access to MAI Cyber 1 Flash as a standalone endpoint. You can only get it inside the MDASH platform. They want enterprises completely dependent on their routing harness, not the underlying intelligence. The model is commoditized. The infrastructure that decides which model to query is where the actual margin lives. This structural shift forces a complete reevaluation of how big tech plans to extract revenue. The real implication. The era of paying a premium for a jack-of-all-trades frontier model is ending. Microsoft's deployment of a 5 billion parameter model inside MDASH proves that specialization destroys generalization on the P&L. For enterprise operators, this means the software stack is splitting in two. You will pay dirt-cheap inference costs for highly specialized local models that do 90% of the daily work, and you will only pay OpenAI or Google for the 10% that requires heavy reasoning. For investors, the signal is even clearer. The massive valuations of frontier labs assume they will capture the entire workflow layer. Microsoft just proved that the infrastructure providers intend to capture the workflow layer themselves, treating those frontier models as overpriced backup generators. The underlying intelligence is becoming a raw utility, while the profit pools shift entirely to the application harness. Watch the August 3rd public preview of Project Perception carefully. If enterprise customers successfully lower their API spend while maintaining benchmark performance, expect every major cloud provider to immediately copy this dual routing architecture. Subscribe for more.